Chapter 1: The Breaking Point. It's strange how quickly everything can change. Yesterday, I thought I had my life completely under control. And today I'm standing on the sidewalk with a box of office stuff, feeling like someone just pulled the rug out from under me. My job wasn't just a job, it was my identity. Every morning, I woke up knowing I was doing something I loved, something that gave me purpose. And then the boss calls me in, says a few words. And suddenly, I'm no longer the enthusiastic young professional with potential, I'm just unnecessary. So there I am, holding a box that contains a wobbling cactus, a mug that reads, "Without coffee, I don't live. I just surviving." And a folder I never even got the chance to go through. And I think to myself, what now? Of course, I did what any properly desperate person would do. I called my friends. "Hey guys, pub at 7?" And as always, they didn't disappoint. We gathered around a table, three familiar faces across from me. Peter, the one who always knows what's going on because he knows half the city. Andrew, the eternal optimist who could make even a statue laugh. And Martin, the quiet observer who rarely joins in, but when he speaks, it's always worth listening to. "So, they actually fired you?" Peter asked, stirring his beer with a straw because, apparently, it tastes different that way. "Yes, really. I'm not going back tomorrow. And neither is my cactus." Andrew laughed so hard that foam came out of his nose. "At least you'll finally have time to find the love of your life." "Sure, if I can find someone willing to take me along with my unpaid rent." I replied, dripping with sarcasm. We drank, laughed, cried basically everything you can cram into one long night. And somewhere between the third and fourth shot, something happened that would later decide my fate. On our table lay a stack of papers. We thought they were just some pub surveys. A customer satisfaction questionnaire, or maybe a contest for a free beer. We were in the mood, so we filled them out. All four of us. Names, addresses, signatures. We scribbled nonsense in the notes and laughed, convinced we'd just entered a free drinks contest. None of us had any idea that afternoon, the pub had been hosting a military recruitment event, and that the papers had accidentally been left behind. If we'd been sober, we probably would have noticed the big army logo on the edge of the paper. But we weren't. Eventually, we paid, stumbled out, and disappeared into the night, laughing loudly. It wasn't until the pub was nearly closing that a man in uniform appeared. Tall, broad-shouldered, with short black hair. He had come only to pick up a hoodie his colleague had forgotten that afternoon. As he walked past the table where we had been sitting, he noticed the completed papers. For him, it was obvious a colleague hadn't just forgotten the hoodie, he'd forgotten the forms too. So he took them, intending to submit them on his colleague's behalf. Chapter 2: The Morning After. I woke up feeling like someone was playing the drums in my head. Hard and completely offbeat. The sun was shining straight into my eyes, which I took as a personal attack. And my stomach was warning me that if gentler conditions didn't arrive immediately, surrender would come in the form of a very awkward ending. When I saw my phone screen with notifications, I wanted to throw it across the room right away. 4 missed calls, a dozen messages, and one new email. I opened it. Then I sat up so fast the room spun around me. "Dear applicant, we're pleased to confirm your enrollment in basic military training. Start date, next Monday." "What?" I yelled so loud the neighbor responded with a thump on the wall. Just then, Peter called. "Hey man, did you get that email too?" "If you mean that crazy military training one, yeah." "Damn. Did we really sign up for this?" Andrew is already crying, and Martin isn't picking up. For a moment, we were silent, because reality was slowly cutting through the hangover haze. Me and the Army? That was about as likely a combination as me running a marathon in the Olympics. We met all four of us later that morning in a cafe, sunglasses on, mineral water in hand. Okay, Peter began. Can someone explain to me how we ended up signing up to be soldiers? It was that paper at the pub, Andrew said, holding his head in his hands. I thought it was a contest for a free beer. I thought it was a customer satisfaction survey, I added. There were rating sections, right? Martin, finally joining the conversation, dryly added. I just wrote in the notes that I'd like them to have pickled herring in their menu. Andrew then erupted into a hysterical fit of laughter, which quickly turned into hysterical crying. Guys, this is ridiculous. I tried to calm them, even though I personally felt like running to the other side of the world. Surely we can cancel this. Peter pulled out his phone, and after a few minutes, his face went pale. So I called the number in the email. And you know what they told me? If we back out, we have to pay a penalty. And the amount. He trailed off, looking at us. How much? Andrew blurted. 2,000. Each. For a moment, silence fell over the table. Only Martin took a sip of his mineral water and dryly remarked, Well, who wants to play with soldiers? That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a funny story anymore. It was real. And I was about to face something I was absolutely unprepared for. Chapter 3, Entering the Military Training Center. Monday morning came faster than I would have liked. When the gates of the military training center swung open, I felt like I was stepping into a completely different world. Tall fences, buildings lined up as if by a ruler, a flag fluttering atop a pole. And there we were, four guys who seemed more suited for some comedy show than this place. Peter looked like he was walking into a board meeting. Andrew tried to appear confident, though the corners of his mouth twitched nervously. And Martin, he looked like he'd rather turn around and go home. Me? I thought that if I made a run for it now, maybe I could still get away. Then a voice stopped me in my tracks. So, you're the new heroes who volunteered for our country? I turned and saw a tall soldier standing right in front of me. Broad shoulders, short dark hair, and a uniform that fit so perfectly it seemed custom-made. His eyes were strict, yet there was something that made me catch my breath for a moment. Names, he interrupted my thoughts. We introduced ourselves one by one. When it was my turn, he looked up from his list and stared directly at me. Just a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity. As if he was examining who I was, and whether I even belonged here. All right, he said finally, in a curt tone. I'm Colonel Kane, and I'll be overseeing your training. So he even had a name, and I had to fight the urge to repeat it silently in my head. The first hours were hell. Entry-level physical tests that would have crushed even top athletes. Running, push-ups, the instructors shouting. Andrew collapsed after 10 minutes and refused to move. Peter tried to negotiate about his sensitive back, and Martin just endured it in silence. I clung on with every ounce of determination. Maybe out of pride, maybe because I felt his eyes on us. And occasionally, just occasionally, our eyes met again. After the tests, we barely stumbled to the barracks. I collapsed onto the bed, feeling like I would never get up again. And just then, the colonel appeared in the doorway. Get used to it, he said calmly. This was just the beginning. Then he paused for a moment, and our eyes met again. Not bad for your first day, he said and walked away. I don't know why, but that sentence echoed in my head long after. And so did his voice. Chapter 4, Training begins. The first week of training was somewhere between hell and an absurd comedy. Mornings started earlier than I'd ever gotten up for a school trip. Exercise in the dark, cold water instead of a shower, and then endless orders that sounded like a foreign language to me. After 20 minutes of drills, Andrew was lying on the ground mumbling that angels were carrying him away. Peter tried to reason everything out. Look, physical activity is healthy. Yes, but the body also needs recovery. The sergeant just looked at him and calmly said, then do 50 push-ups to develop your argumentation skills. Martin hardly said a word. He just huffed, sweated, and occasionally muttered things like, "I'm just going to die here." And me? I held on, even though it felt like my body was on fire. Part of me wanted to give up, but something else kept me going. More precisely, someone. Colonel Kane. He didn't yell at us like the other instructors, but when he spoke, it carried weight. And I noticed him watching me. Not constantly, not obviously, but sometimes. With a look I couldn't quite read. During a full gear-running drill, I collapsed on my knees when I tripped over a rock. I hit the ground hard, the backpack dragging me down even more. My knees burned, and I gasped in a cloud of dust. I was bracing for a scream of commands, but instead, a pair of heavy military boots appeared in front of me. I looked up, and there he was. He reached out his hand. I hesitated for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, confident. He lifted me in one smooth motion, as if I weighed nothing. He held my elbow, too, making sure I stood steady. His touch through the thin fabric of my uniform was electrifying. It felt like a current ran from his fingers up my arm to my shoulder. Even when he let go, I swear I still can feel his warmth on my skin. For a moment, our eyes met. I caught myself not breathing. It was only a fraction of a second, but it felt endless. Then he turned and continued on, as if nothing had happened. But I stood there for a while, heart pounding, with a strange feeling that that touch would haunt me for a long time. That evening in the barracks, we talked about the day. "I can't do this," whined Andrew, waving his swollen hands. "My body's built for the couch, not military." If I had a lawyer, Peter pondered, he'd definitely challenge this as an invalid contract. Martin just stared at the ceiling and said, my epitaph will read, "Died for filling out the wrong questionnaire." We laughed even though everything ached. But once the others fell asleep, I kept thinking about the way Colonel had looked at me, and why his opinion mattered so much. Chapter 5. Closeness. The night air was cold and sharp, so much so that every breath felt like it was cutting into my lungs. The military base was swallowed by silence, broken only by the occasional creak of a gate or the wind tapping against metal. It was my first night watch, and I felt ridiculous, a small man in an oversized uniform, holding a weapon I barely knew how to handle. I stood by the gate, trying not to sway, when I heard footsteps. Firm, deliberate steps you couldn't ignore. "The guards should be more alert," a quiet voice said. I jerked and turned. Of course, it was him. Colonel Kane. The soldier who seemed to have everything under control. Even me. I am alert, I stutter. He smiled just slightly, the corner of his mouth twitching. "Your eyes betray you. You're dreaming, not watching." I didn't know what to say, so I stared straight ahead, pretending to concentrate. But he stepped closer. Too close. Now he was right beside me, and I could feel the heat of his body, smell his uniform, and something strangely intoxicating. "Look at me," he said calmly, but there was a tone in his voice that left no room for refusal. I obeyed. And in that moment, it hit me. His eyes were dark, serious, yet there was something that completely disarmed me. He held my gaze so firmly it felt like he could see straight to my core. Suddenly, he raised his hand and moved even closer. Not abruptly, not commanding, but slowly, as if giving me the chance to flinch. I couldn't move. His fingers touched my chin and gently lifted it. "Chin up," he said, this time quietly, almost a whisper. It was a tiny touch, but it hit like lightning. A wave of heat ran through my whole body, and I felt as if I were in a dream I didn't want to wake from. Then he lowered his hand, unhurried. "Better," he added calmly, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, heart pounding, breath catching, and the only thought I could hold on to was, Why did this affect me more than any words anyone has ever spoken to me? Chapter 6: Crisis and Turning Point. Breaking the rules in a military training center is easy, especially when you have three friends who aren't exactly built for discipline. Andrew and Martin had sneaked out at night to grab food from the kitchen, and Peter was keeping watch for them. Of course, they got caught. When we were lined up in front of the instructors that morning, my stomach twisted. Punishment was inevitable. But before anyone could say anything, I stepped forward. It was my fault, I declared. I had night watch. My friends' eyes went wide. I knew that by taking the blame, I'd bear the punishment alone while they would be spared. The instructor just nodded. Fine. As a punishment, you'll move the boxes from the storage to main building this afternoon. Alone. So there I stood soaked by rain, sore, exhausted carrying heavy boxes that seemed to grow heavier with each step. Every movement was agony. Sweat streamed down me, my arms burned. But I didn't give up. Feeling like a hero? A familiar voice said suddenly. I flinched. Colonel stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. But there was no mockery in his eyes, just a strange mix of irritation and concern. This is my punishment, I muttered between gasps. He stepped closer. If you destroy yourself the first week, you won't help anyone. Before I could protest, he grabbed one of the boxes and lifted it as if it weighed nothing. You don't have to, I started. Shut up and continue. He cut me off. Yet the corners of his mouth lifted just slightly. We worked in silence, the rain falling around us. But the longer it went on, the more aware I became of his presence. How our hands brushed occasionally, how he glanced at me as I struggled to catch my breath. And then it happened. The floor was slippery, my legs heavy. Suddenly, my foot slipped, and I lost my balance. Before I hit the ground, I felt him grab me firmly. He pressed me to his body, his hand on my waist. We were closer than ever. My heart raced, and I could feel his breath on my face. His eyes were locked on mine, dark, intense, unyielding. You should be careful, he whispered. Before I could answer, he pulled me closer. And then our lips met. At first, gently, as if testing whether I would allow it. Then more strongly, hungrily, with a need that consumed me entirely. All the rain, the fatigue, the punishment, it all vanished. There was only him and me. That kiss tore down the wall between us. When he finally pulled away, he still held me close. His hand rested on my waist, his forehead against mine. In that moment, I knew there was no turning back. Chapter 7: The Secret Between Us. The morning after the punishment, I woke up feeling as if I had been dreaming. But it wasn't a dream. I only had to touch my lips, and I could feel his taste, his breath again. And the image him holding me as if he never wanted to let go kept returning with every blink. All day, I felt my knees weakening. And it wasn't just the training. Every time I caught sight of Colonel, something seemed to tighten in my chest. He gave nothing away. Strict, professional, as always. But I knew he remembered just as vividly as I did. During the morning exercise, we rotated through the obstacle course. Everyone was wrapped up in their own struggle, Andrew hanging from a rope, screaming he was afraid of heights. Peter arguing with the instructor about the correct technique. Martin stuck with his boot between the logs. I tried to focus, but then I caught sight of him out of the corner of my eye. He was watching me. Only me. For a fraction of a second, our eyes met. And even though it lasted only a moment, I felt it in my entire body. As if that look carried more than anyone should ever know. That evening in the dining hall, I tried to act normal. I laughed at the boys' silly jokes, listened to their complaints, but the instant Colonel passed by, my hands froze. His shoulder brushed mine lightly. Coincidence. Definitely a coincidence. And then, at night. Everyone was asleep, the silence broken only by Andrew's snoring. I tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When I finally gave up and went outside for fresh air, he was there. Leaning against the wall, cigarette at the corner of his mouth, eyes fixed on the darkness. "Can't sleep?" he asked calmly, without turning toward me. "Yes," I admitted. He looked at me. In the smoke and moonlight, he seemed different, not so untouchable, more human, tired. Yet still dangerously attractive. We stood there for a while, wordless. Then, almost unconsciously, my fingers brushed his as I leaned against the same wall. Neither of us pulled away. It was a moment no one else would notice. But for me, it meant everything. Chapter 8: Closeness and Fear. Training worsened day by day. The instructors pushed us as if they wanted to discover the limits of human endurance. The guys were barely standing, and I was holding on for one reason. Or rather, for him. Every stolen glance, every subtle touch gave me more strength than all the meals combined. When Colonel corrected my stance during shooting, he stood so close behind me that I could feel his breath on my neck. His hand gripped my shoulder to guide me. For a moment, I almost forgot I was holding a weapon. "Elbow higher," he whispered. His voice resonated deep in my chest. I obeyed, but my heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear the shot. That evening, I tried to act normal. Andrew writhed with back pain. Peter contemplated a legal loophole to cancel the training. And Martin insisted he'd rather work in a mine than be here. We laughed, but inside, I was somewhere else. Waiting for the moment I'd see him again. Just the two of us. That moment came sooner than I expected. After lights out, I slipped outside just for some fresh air, I told myself. But there he was, exactly like the night before, sitting on the steps with his hands resting on his knees. "You again," he said softly when he saw me. There was no anger, only something like a smile he tried to hide. I sat down beside him. For a while, we didn't speak. The air was cold, but there was heat between us. I don't know who moved first. Maybe me. Maybe him. But suddenly, our lips met again. This time, slower, deliberate. As if we both wanted to savor the fact that we were really doing this. His hand slid into my hair, firm, possessive, and I leaned into his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. It felt both right and wrong. Dangerous. And then footsteps. Approaching. Someone was coming out of the barracks. We immediately pulled apart, breath caught, eyes wide. Colonel grabbed me by the shoulder and pressed me into the shadow of the building. We were so close I could feel his hot breath on my face as he whispered, "Quiet." The footsteps passed, and we stood pressed together, unable to move. Only when the sound faded did he finally let go. "This is madness," I murmured. "If someone catches us." Before I could finish, he pressed a finger to my lips. It feels like he tried to say this way, that everything is okay. Chapter 9: The Decision. The training was approaching the end. Only a few days remained before the final test. After evening drills, the commander had us line up. His voice carried over the darkening yard as he made an announcement. Now was the one and only chance to walk away. The final test would be voluntary, he said. The air grew heavy. Andrew looked at me with pleading eyes. Peter was already half raising his hand. And me. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. Later, on the way back to the barracks, Colonel stopped me. No orders, no formalities, just his hand on my shoulder. "Well?" he asked quietly. "Leave or stay till the end?" "I don't know," I admitted. "If I left, it would be over. But if I stayed..." My voice faltered. I don't know if I have it in me. For a moment, he studied me in silence. Then he said, "You have more in you than anyone here. You just need to believe it." His voice softened, losing its usual steel. "And if you stay, you won't face it alone." Those last words struck straight through me. I wanted to reach for him, to hold him, to tell him how I feel about him. But I couldn't not with everyone else around. "I'll stay," I whispered at last. He smiled, barely, almost invisibly, but it was enough. That smile gave me more strength than any words ever could. Chapter 10: The Final Test. The day of the final test came sooner than any of us expected. We had endured things we could never have imagined, and we had survived. Andrew crossed the finish line with his last breath and collapsed as if he never wanted to rise again. Peter, who had complained and schemed the whole way through, broke down in tears when the certificate was placed in his hands. And Martin, our eternal tragedian, laughed and shouted that he was a hero after all. I just stood there, holding that piece of paper. It felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. But something else weighed on me to his gaze. Colonel stood off to the side, official, distant, every inch the soldier he was supposed to be. But when our eyes met for a heartbeat, something passed between us that no one else could see. After the ceremony, we all headed to the pub where it had all begun. Andrew ordered shots, Peter tried to flirt with the barman, and Martin swore he would never drink again even as he ordered another beer. We laughed together, as if it had all been nothing more than a wild, impossible dream. But I knew there was something unfinished. I stepped outside for air, and there he was waiting, as though he had known I would come. "So, you made it," he said quietly. "Only because of you," I answered. We stood there, both uncertain, suspended in the space between us. Then I closed it. I grabbed his collar and pulled him toward me. The kiss was neither cautious nor hidden. It was real, long suppressed. And this time I felt no fear, only certainty. When we finally broke apart, he smiled. "You know this won't be easy." "I know," I said. "But I'm done running." Laughter from my friends spilled out from the pub behind us. That night belonged to all of us for making it through. But this moment out here in the quiet belonged only to him and me. To us. And I knew this was only the beginning of our story. The end. If you enjoy this story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps this channel grow and brings you closer to the next stories.